Hey folks, I'm Tom, also known as Bamboo Leaves. Today we're going to dive into the sound of Jon Hopkins and break down a little track that I've made. On this channel we break down various artists and alternative electronic genres so that you can see how it's done. So if that interests you, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more just like this. So with that out of the way, let's jump over to the DAW and break down this cosmic house style track. First up, we've got all of these drums. Okay, so we've got these really organic, crispy, Foley sounding drums. And this is one of those Jon Hopkins style things to use lots of Foley, lots of crispy sounds, lots of crunchy snares and claps in his drums. So the kicks are made up from 2 layers. So first up we've got this clicky layer. So that's just the top end of a kick. So I've taken out lots of that low end and I've taken out some of that high end as well because I don't want it too clicky and too harsh. I've also bust that one off to a small room reverb as well to get a little bit of that room in there as well to fill out the stereo field a little bit. Second half of this kick is a thumpy kick. So that one we've got much more rounder, more subby kick where I'm leaving in that sub and thump and I'm just taking out some of that top end to kind of round off the sound. So without it and with it, it just deadens it and rounds it off. And that's because I wanted the click to take more of that top end energy and I think those rounder kicks are a bit more in the sort of softer cosmic house Jon Hopkins style. So I got this third smaller kick that's just there to roll off the other 2 kicks. So I've just got that coming in just before the other kicks to get that rolling effect. Next up I've got a snare. So a nice crunchy snare sound, so without the processing. So a bit more high end, and I've just rolled off a lot of that low end, and again that high end I'm taking out that energy because I'm getting the more crispier, crunchier sounds. Not too much top end in these Jon Hopkins drums. And I'm also driving it with a distortion, saturating it, making it crispier and crunchier. So without it, and with it. Okay, next I've got this reverse snare layer. So that is just one of those snares. I've bounced it down, so I would have clicked on it, I would have bounced it in place, it would have created another version of that. I then would have gone into this top left hand corner, clicked on reverse, and then that's what I end up with. So I get that leads into the other snares. So all of the snares together, and I'm just throwing that in every so often to kind of give a bit more waviness to these snares. Right, next up I've got this noise snare layer. So without any processing, sounds more like this. So I wanted to get a snare that's mostly just white noise. I then took out a bunch of that low and high ends to kind of box it in a little bit more. And then here is where I'm doing something interesting. So I'm using Shaperbox 2, but just the noise shaper module. And I'm using that to just throw on an extra layer of sort of texture and Foley on top of this. So if you can hear that like rattle at the end, it's because I've got this key rattle that is just playing a sample over the top. So whenever it triggers for that snare, it'll put on this kind of key rattle with an envelope as well. If I have the release longer, so it just has that, but I bring it nice and low. So it's the same as if I just got this kind of key rattle sample, a loop from somewhere, and then I just layered it on top and I just made it decay with some envelope. It's kind of the same thing, but it's done in a plugin, and it kind of helps to clean up the workspace and improve the workflow. That'd be a crucial part to these drums, is adding in these top layers and these Foley kind of found sound rattles and things like that to bulk out the sound and make it feel a bit more organic and natural. Okay, I've next got these claps. So this is just a regular clap. I've taken out lows and highs, and that's to just give it a bit more mid to low end, just to kind of fill out that frequency spectrum for all of those snares. Really fills it out. Some of these snares that land on the bar, some of them that are dragged off, and I kind of vary that. So sometimes they're a bit further dragged forwards, sometimes they're a bit more on, sometimes they're dragged backwards, and doing that gives much more of a full sound where you've got these flammy effects going on. And that's kind of important to make sure that it's not too stale and static by just having them all play at the same time. Next, I've got this open hi-hat. And I did use a vocal transformer within Logic to take out some of those formants to make it a bit sort of deeper sounding. So without it, and then with it, next I've got these small cymbals. So without any of the processing, sounds like this. That's just a loop that I found from somewhere. I've added a transient master, so you could have any kind of transient shaper. I'm giving it a bit more attack and taking out some of that sustain to kind of make it more short and tight sounding. I've added in a EQ to take out the low energy and a little bit of that high energy. An overdrive on there, so some more saturation on these. And then I've got an LFO tool on there that's kind of giving that pumping, so it's a bit like a side chain pump. Gives it a bit more of a swing in rhythm. And I've got that sat quite low in the mix, but it's just there to fill out and provide a bit more swing. I've got another hi-hat. So that's just playing on the upbeats. Just sounds like this without the processing. So it's just that noise again. So just white noise, pink noise, something like that. And I'm using that as a hi-hat. I'm taking out some of those lows and highs again. And again, I've got on a shaper box, and this time I've also got the key rattle. So I've got these key rattles going on the upbeats as well as on the snares. Adds some top end sparkle to this and a bit more of that natural found sound vibe. I found these vinyl crackles. And you won't be able to hear it very much when everything else is playing, but it kind of adds a bit more crisp and texture to these drums. On that same line of thinking, I've got this hi-hat FX. Really low and quiet in the mix. If we listen to all the drums together, so it's important to note that, like, part of that Jon Hopkins style, when you're coming to the end of a phrase of some drums, you might stop some of those drums. So for example, you might take out some of the kicks to leave a little bit of space before bringing it back in, keep the listener interested. That's kind of what I'm doing at the end of this phrase here. And that'll kind of complement the synths when they also drop back in there as well. With all of these drums that you're seeing there, I've bussed those all off to a drum group. So that drum group is this drum bus over here. So on top of that, I've put another distortion plugin. So this is a Sound Toys Decapitator. Any saturation or distortion overdrivey plugins will do similar things. But yeah, I'm just adding a bit more crunch to these drums through the use of that. So if I just get rid of all of that processing, we'll listen to the drums. A little bit flat. Put in the decapitator. It kind of crunches it up a little bit. Next, I've got this Xfer OTT. So just an upwards downwards compression. Gives it a bit more life and energy. And there's also a bit more volume. And I've put a limiter on there. So So that's like something's quite important, to group your drums together, put some saturation, some limiting, some compression, to glue them as all one cohesive unit, and you're stopping those transients from bleeding over. And if you want to go into like mastering stages for your mixes, that's quite an important step. I've got a tambourine pair that plays in the final phrase of this track. So that's just two, it's just one higher tambourine and one lower, and I've got them playing offset from each other. Okay, so now we'll move on to some more instrumental parts of this. First up, I've got this airy pad sound, so let's listen to that. So this is kind of like a bit of a Jon Hopkins signature style sounding pad, like really top end, lots of hiss, lots of aggression. It sounds kind of quite ethereal, quite cosmic. I started off with the sample. I then dragged that one into the quick sampler in Logic, and I looped over this small section here. So if I take off all the processing, and I pitched it up a little bit, I threw on an EQ, so I took out lots of that low end. I really wanted it airy and high frequency sounding. Taking out that low end, I've put a big old reverb on there with the mix to 100%. So that's when we start getting into that pad, big, lush sound. Next, I've got this tape delay from Logic, and I've got that on just so that I can use this clip threshold to really bring down that crunch, and it'll add some tape saturation to it as well. And I've also got a bit of EQing on there so that I'm boxing it in a bit further. And also this is doing some modulation, so it's doing that tape emulation modulation, so it's got kind of a bit of a pitch wobble, so you can hear that now. And also using that, I've got the spread pushed up, so that's going out wide to the side. So without it, now with it, getting that saturated sound, it's starting to get a little bit distorted, a little bit in your face. And I've also included another one of these noise shapers, and instead of like a key rattle sound on top of it, I've got white noise. So it's just playing some white noise on top of that. So if I'm just solo it, if I take off the solo, it kind of blends the two. Lots of high end, lots of top end energy, aggressive, crispy. On top of that one, I've got a little bit of automation. So that's just volume automation, so that it fades in at the start, it cuts out just before the drop, and then it comes back in. Next, I'll move on to this pluck synth sound. So you can probably hear some automation modulation on that one as well. And I'll start off with the sound generation, which is the retro synth. I just have this noise blended in with a square wave, and I've got the oscillators moved away from the noise a little bit. That noise gives it a bit more of that hammery kind of transient sound, and using the filter envelope and the amp envelope along with this cutoff filter that's got the resonance boosted a little bit, I'm getting that plucky sound. You'll be hearing a little bit of delay. That'll be because I've got a bus off to a stereo delay that's just doing a little bit of... Okay, next I've got this transient shaper on top of that as well, so I'm giving it a little bit more attack on that transient. Without it, with it. Not much in it, but it's just pushing that transient a little bit further because I wanted these quite aggressive. Next, we'll bring in an EQ, pushing those mid-highs and cutting out the lows. Snare reverb sound. Ooh, sounding like nice and big. I like that. Next up, tape modulation. Doing the pitch shifting, a little bit of wobbling, only quite subtle though. So we'll listen to it with all of those on it now. The sound is evolving and changing as the track goes along, and that's because I've got quite a lot of automation on this track. So we'll start with the first one. I got that stereo delay that I mentioned before. It will move and present more stereo delay to that bus as it goes through the track, and less. And as I want to build up a bit of tension, remove it, that's where I'm getting from that. So if you listen for the delay, you can see it moves along. Got these envelope sustain and decay filters that I've got, and I will have just set it to touch over here in the automation section. Would have grabbed this marker down here and shifted it around while it was playing to see how it sounded best. So if I play it, you can see it automating itself about. And then I did the same thing for the mix of the reverbs. So yeah, I was just doing that to make sure I could build tension in the track, keep it interesting, and keep that synth evolving. And that's a very Jon Hopkins thing to do, is mess around with loads of those synth parameters and effects to keep it interesting. Next, we've got this pluck bass synth. That started off with a retro synth again. So nothing fancy about that one. We've got some sawtooth waves and a sine wave, and then we've got the filter and amp envelopes, giving a little bit of a pluck. Started off just like that one. I threw an overdrive on there, beef up that sound, add some saturation, and then a limiter that was just there to catch the transients if I needed it. And then later on, I've got, instead of a plucky bass synth, I've got a more solid sounding bass sound. The sound started off like this one. So it doesn't pluck, it doesn't decay off, it just stays as a solid note. But we've got similar wave generation elements to this one. I added an overdrive, round it off, make it a little bit more saturated. I got a limiter, and then I'm boosting some of those higher range mid harmonics. But also you could hear that it's got a little bit of a interesting glide. Those higher notes I've got in there through just playing the occasional short higher note, and because the synth is set to, in the settings, it's set to legato, it will shift up to those notes and come back down, all as part of the same amp envelope. So I have got all of those instrumental parts bussed off to this synth bus. So if we listen to the synth bus, so that's all of those synths. What I've done is I've got a EQ on there that I'm using to do a little bit of group automation on all of those. I've got another decapitator on there to add further saturation and beef and crunch to all of those, to group them together to give them a similar additional saturation. Without it, with it, brings up the level a little bit. And then I've got a track spacer on there, and that's just for my side chaining of the kick drum. So if I play the kick drum at the top, you could either use a sidechain compression or an LFO tool or some volume automation on the kick instead of track spacer. Track spacer will do it based on frequency as well as volume. Okay, so that channel EQ you can probably see moving about all by itself. And that's because on the synth bus, I've got it so that it reads the low cut frequency, and it will bring it up at the end of an intro phrase and then one of the end phrases to add a bit more tension, along with all of those other effects and synth parameters. So you look at it. And I'm definitely hearing that in Jon Hopkins tracks. Lots of automations on groups of synths and drums to thin things out just before the end of a phrase so that you can kind of signal another drop that's coming up. And there you have it. That's the full track. So what I'll do is I'll play it all together as one so you can hear all of these individual elements playing off each other. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. If you have any questions, leave them down below and I'll get around to answering them. Once again, if you like this video, leave a like and subscribe to this channel so that you can catch more videos just like this one as they come out. But other than that, I'll catch you in the next one.